It was a good time to go ahead and get started with our study for tonight. So we are going to be in Judges chapters 11 and 12, studying the ministry of Jephthah to Israel and to Gilead in particular. So Lord, just pray that you would guide this study tonight. You would just reveal your wisdom to us through your word. Just pray that you would bless each of us with a calm spirit and the ability to focus on your word, that any of us lacking wisdom would humble ourselves and ask you, and just ask with the full assurance that you give to anyone who asks without reproach. So I pray that you would just be here with us, give each of us a fresh filling of your spirit tonight as we study your word. Amen. Okay, so we are focusing on chapters 11 and 12 tonight, but I want to just start with a quick overview of the end of chapter 10, which is going to set us up for our judge tonight, being Jephthah. So, howdy, sir. Are you looking for barbecue?
Well, I just got here from South Dakota, and I'm right across the street. I better stop and check it out.
Yes, sir.
I guess that I'm the wrong night here.
Yeah.
This is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but we've got chili up there. If you want some chili, you're welcome to grab a bowl.
I'm just checking it out.
You're on the right way.
I don't want to scare anyone.
No, you're fine.
Now you're good. Yeah, would you like some chili?
Oh, I'll be back.
Okay.
She just called me. Where you at? I said, I'm across the street checking out the barbecue place. Good. I'm waiting for you.
Uh-oh. You're going to be in trouble then.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday is when we're open.
I'll bring your ass over here.
All right. Thank you, sir. Okay. We return after these messages. So Israel, after the judgeship of Tola and Jair, the last two prophets that we looked at, which was very little detail for both of those guys, but after their time ruling over Israel, the people of Israel, go into even deeper disobedience and then even deeper oppression. They go and choose for themselves 7 false gods to worship. The Baals, Astaroth, the god of Syria, Sidon, Moab, the Ammonites, and the Philistines, and they forsook God and did not serve him. And so the Lord became angry with his people, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the Ammonites, and they were crushed and oppressed for 18 years. So the people cry out to the Lord again, saying that they have sinned against him because they had forsaken him and worshiped other gods. And God comes back at them and says, more or less, I'm not going to save you anymore because you have once again whored after these other gods. So why don't you go and cry out to those gods who you have put your faith in to save you, because I am not saving you anymore. So the people of Israel come back together and they say to God, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you, only please deliver us this day. And then they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. And the Lord became impatient over the misery that the Israelites were in. And so the Israelites have come to the realization that the worst that they can experience while serving God is better than the best that they experience while they're serving these false gods. And so they say, Lord, just do whatever seems right to you to bring us out of this enslavement, more or less. And so what happens is that the Ammonites are called to arms and they encamp against Gilead, which is a region within Ephraim and Manasseh. And so they encamp against Gilead, and the people of Israel from the place of Gilead come together and they encamp at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, say to one another, who will fight against the Ammonites for us? And so that's where we kind of start our study tonight. They have brought themselves together, but in this time there is no king and no judge, because the last two judges have passed away, fallen away, and the people have been under oppression for 18 years at this point. So we begin in chapter 11. It says that Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife had also bore him sons. So we are introduced to a guy who is a very uncertain background. Josephus says that he was a Gentile. And the ancient rabbinic scholars say that he was not only a Gentile, but an Ishmaelite, which means that he would be more or less kind of a cousin to the people of Israel, being that Ishmael was the son of Abraham through his Egyptian concubine, more or less. And but he still is not a Ishmael, and his descendants were not people of the promise or of the covenant with God. So the Bible doesn't tell us whether Jephthah was or was not an Israelite. It seems that the area that he is going to be in Tob is in Syria, kind of outside of the land on the other side of the river, and that he was, living in a land of pagan idolatry for most of his life. So he was the son of the same father as his brothers, but not of the same mother. The father seems to have had a, kind of Judah moment and had a situation with a prostitute where he ended up with a son. We don't have any more detail than that, other than I actually think it's kind of interesting that son ended up in his household, even though the mother very likely wasn't. It makes me wonder how that happened. I don't really know. It doesn't seem like a common situation to me, but one way or the other, the relationship between his father and this prostitute end with Jephthah living in his father's household. But at the same time, Gilead, which is Jephthah's father, his wife bore to him sons. So there are legitimate sons and an illegitimate son, at least one. And when his wife's sons grew up, chapter 2, verse 2, they drove Jephthah out, and they said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." So then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So evidently he was driven out of his father's house when it seemed that there was a possibility of him being old enough to inherit among his brothers. So he was probably, at the very least, in young adulthood, maybe at 18, maybe 20 years old, and his brothers. There's certain things about this that kind of remind me of the situation with Joseph and his brothers, where, it's the same father but different mothers, and, having this situation of different mothers pits the brothers against one another, and it gets to the point where the one brother who's on the outs feels that his life is in danger, and that he's, like Joseph's brothers sold him after they had planned to kill him. They went ahead and just sold him. And in this circumstance, it seems that they may have been planning on killing him, possibly, because he fled and went so far as to go across the Jordan River, just totally out of the land that he was living in. And as he was in this land, worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So there's interesting parallels to David's life here as well. We know that when David was under the persecution of King Saul, he fled into the wilderness, and it doesn't say in Samuel that worthless fellows collected around him. That wasn't the word that was used, but it was anybody that was in trouble or oppressed, or that was a debtor or a slave that, like a debt slave. They all, fled from where they were and went and became part of David's army. So it seems like the story arc here between Jephthah and David are kind of similar, but Jephthah's also like, he is essentially becoming like a raider and a warrior. He's, in this day and age, it was more or less acceptable to go and raid villages and steal everything they had, as long as they were the villages of the enemies, across your borders. So he was a man who became a mighty warrior. So verse 4 says that after a time, the Amorites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites, not Amorites, that gets kind of confusing, but the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why then have you come to me now when you are in distress?" So, yeah, Jephthah's pointing out kind of the hypocrisy and the double standard that these guys are operating by. It really is kind of an interesting storyline that these guys unwittingly kind of created the person that they needed in order to come back and, fight on their behalf. They probably are the kind of politicians that can spin this around and say that this was their plan the whole time, and that, they had to send him off into exile to become a tough war leader so that they could call him back. But he's not having it. He said, "Come on, guys. Why would I be interested in coming back to help you in your time of distress when in my time of distress you drove me away from my family and from everything that I knew?" They hated him formerly. And verse 8 says that the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "That's why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head." And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be witness between us if we do not do as you say." So basically what's happening here is that Jephthah is saying, "I'm not interested in coming back to help you guys if once I win the battle for you, you just send me back into exile." He's basically saying, if I come and take over your army and defeat your enemies, you better believe that I am going to be in charge after that. There's interesting periods throughout history where, we've seen men be sent off to fight the battles of and the wars of our country. In some circumstances, they come back, like from World War II, and, the great generals become congressmen and senators and even presidents of the United States. And then in other situations, in other wars, they come back and are, spat upon by the people of the country. And, it seems that Jephthah is having those same kind of concerns, that he doesn't want to put his life at risk and, probably also put his position that he's built for himself out of his place of exile. He's built a life for himself, and he doesn't want to leave that and potentially lose it if he's just going to come and fight for them and then be driven out once again. So they say to Jephthah, "The Lord is witness between us if we do not do as you say." So they have called the Lord as a witness against themselves. They've essentially made a vow to Jephthah that if he will come and fight on their behalf, and interestingly win, obviously, so he doesn't get to be the leader of Israel if he doesn't have victory. He has to have victory before he's able to be their leader in peace, which is, kind of an interesting picture. But they are willing to put all this on the line. And, I believe that there must have been some leading of the Lord in this situation because, just looking back to chapter 10 where they say to the Lord, "Do with us whatever seems good to you." And so that's what we're in the midst of here, is the Lord directing these steps to bring Jephthah into control of Israel. Now, Jephthah's an interesting guy because he makes some questionable decisions. I don't know if any of y'all read ahead, but he's going to make a really questionable decision and a questionable vow. But he also is about to quote almost verbatim an entire chapter from the book of Numbers in talking to this other king. He seems to be a man who knows the word of God, whether he is a Israelite or not, but he also is a man who, from the time of his young adulthood was, culturally brought up in the midst of idolatry in this pagan land that he was driven into. And it seems that both things are tugging at him in both directions. And it's kind of unclear which side wins out in the end. But Jephthah, he's willing to be their leader if they are willing to have him as their leader and not just use him for their own purposes. So verse 11 says that Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head over them. And Jephthah spoke all of his words before the Lord at Mizpah. So Mizpah is the place where Jacob, who is later renamed Israel, and his uncle Laban put up a heap and a pillar in between them to be a witness that they would not pass over it to one another to do the other harm. And they named it Mizpah, which means the Lord is witness between us. So it's kind of interesting that these guys are willing to bring the Lord in as a witness in this specific place. It seems like Jephthah had all of this planned out and intended to meet with these leaders in this specific place as a very symbolic witness that, that there is a witness being God between them and him. And so he speaks all of his words, which we just read, before the Lord at Mizpah. So the Lord is now a witness between Jephthah and the people of Gilead and the broader people of Israel that he is to be their leader if the Lord grants him victory. So there is the beginning of seeing the Lord's hand in this, that he's not even claiming the victory for himself. He's giving the victory to God in this circumstance and the decision to God, saying, if God gives me victory, if the Ammonites are given over to him by the Lord, that he will be their head. And now the Lord is witness between them and him. So verse 12 goes on, and it says that Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, what do you have against me that you have come to me to fight against my land? So the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land, from the Arnon to the Jabbok and from the Jordan, now therefore restore it peaceably. So it's pretty simple. Their gripe against the Israelites, because honestly, the king of the Amorites, he has no idea who Jephthah is. So Jephthah is kind of putting this on a personal level and saying, what do you have against me? And this king probably is saying, I don't even know who you are. But my problem is that the Israelites took away my land. So Jephthah again sent messengers to the Amorites. Verse 15, he said to them, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. But when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. And they sent also to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. Then they journeyed through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab and arrived on the east side of the land of Moab and encamped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, please let us pass through your land to our country. So it's important at this point to note that he is talking about now the Amorites, not the Ammonites. Two names that had me confused for a minute while I was studying this, but two different peoples. So Sihon, the king of the Amorites, did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. And the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all the people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that, or you could say this country. And they took possession of all the territory of the Amorites, the Arnon, the Jabbok, and the wilderness to the Jordan. So basically what Jephthah is doing here is he is pointing out that historically, and again, this is about 300 years before the time that Jephthah is living, the Amorites were in control of this piece of land that the Ammonites are now contending with them over. It does seem likely that the Amorites took the land from the Ammonites, so the Ammonites do have some kind of claim to the land, but what Jephthah is going to point out is that they don't have beef with him. If anything, really, they would have beef with the Amorites, who the Israelites defeated hundreds of years ago. So then the Lord, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before this people Israel. And are you to take possession of them? That's a great question. So he's pointing out, again, not only is this land not taken from you, but from the Amorites, but it was taken by God, by Jehovah, by the Lord, from the Amorites. So, you basically don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with God at this point, which is, kind of shows some wisdom on Jephthah's part, that regardless of where he's at spiritually, he understands the power of Jehovah, of God, and says, like, you can mess with me if you want, but really your beef is with the Lord, not with me. So he goes on in verse 24 to say, will you not possess what Chemosh, your God, gives you to possess? And all that the Lord our God has dispossessed before us, we will possess. Now, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? Well, Israel lived in Heshbon and all of its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon for 300 years. Why did you not deliver them within that time? I therefore have not sinned against you, and you do me wrong by making war on me. The Lord, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and between the people of Ammon. But the king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words that Jephthah had sent to him. So Jephthah makes a pretty compelling case here. But ultimately, I believe that it is the will of God for the Israelites to have this war and this battle against the Ammonites. It doesn't specifically say that God hardened the heart of the king of the Ammonites, but I think it was kind of a foregone conclusion, diplomacy aside, that there was going to be a battle and a war in this situation. So he tries his attempt at logic and his attempt at diplomacy, and it goes pretty quickly from that onto verse 29, saying that the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah. So I think it's interesting and important to note in the Old Testament context, we mostly see that the Spirit of the Lord comes upon someone, not that it indwells them or fills them. I believe that this is much more a picture of empowerment by the Spirit of God rather than really an intimate relationship between God and the person who the Holy Spirit is upon in this circumstance. There obviously is some relationship there, but this is really about Jephthah having the wisdom and the power of the Holy Spirit to fight the battles against the enemies of God. So the Spirit of the Lord is upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. So he is making kind of a circuit through this land to go and meet up with the Ammonites in battle. And as he is going, it doesn't say this necessarily, but I would heavily assume that he is picking up an army as he is going to fight against these people, because I'm sure he comes to this place with his worthless men that are around him, but he still has to put together an army to fight against the enemies of the Lord. So verse 30, we get into some of the questionable behavior of Jephthah. It says that Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it as a burnt offering. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand, and he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel Kirim with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. So that's one of the shortest accounts of a battle and a full-out victory over the enemies of the Lord that we see. But it almost at this point has become kind of a sideshow to what is going on here. We have a guy who, again, we're not sure necessarily whether he is an Israelite or a Gentile, potentially an Ishmaelite. He is a guy that at the very least has head knowledge of the history of the people of Israel and of the law. Because, what I read here about the history of the people coming up out of Egypt, it is almost a word for word account of, if you go back and look in Exodus when it goes through that. So this guy knows the law. He knows at least some of it. And yet he is making a foolish vow before the Lord. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 22 says that if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty of sin. So the Lord encourages people that if you just don't put yourself in the position of making a vow that's unnecessary, then you will not be in a position of sinning. But what Jephthah is doing here is he's putting himself in a position that if he fulfills his vow, he will be sinning. And if he does not fulfill his vow, he will be sinning before the Lord. But luckily, there is a little bit more nuance that is possible here. We don't have all of the details, but there is nuance that is possible. So the land in which Jephthah lived as a bandit was a land that was rife with and full of human sacrifice. You know, these people at the time had small iron statues that they would put in the fire until it was red hot, and the statue would have arms like this. They're prominently displayed in Israel in the Natural History Museum, these statues of Molech. And they would get these statues red hot and put their children and their infants in their arms until they died. And whenever we see in these books, the Lord talking about their children passing through the fires to Molech, that is what it's talking about. And that was most prominent in the land where Jephthah was living. And there are other instances as well of humans and children being sacrificed to the false gods of this area, which the Lord does point out that when they are worshiping these gods, they are worshiping demons. So, again, I always like to point out that this idolatry that's happening is not just a smoke show or something that's fake. It is a real spiritual battle that is playing out on an earthly plane, and these people are worshiping demons. They are worshiping beings who their greatest intent is to pervert the most beautiful things that God has made into the most heinous things that could happen. That is the intention of Satan and of his demons, is a perversion of what God sees as beautiful. And I can't think of anything more perverse than God's image bearers being burned alive to demons. That's one of the most perverse things that could possibly happen. And that is what was happening and accepted and celebrated in the land that Jephthah came of age in, more or less. So we have a guy that seems to be absolutely pulled in multiple different directions. And there are some scholars that are absolutely sure that it was Jephthah's intention to sacrifice a person, because what else is going to be coming out the door of your house to greet you unless it's a dog? Some have pointed out that his mother-in-law may have come out to greet him often. No offense. That was just a joke I had to tell. Sorry. Yeah. But either way, whether it was as simple as being a foolish and thoughtless vow that he was making, all the way to the point of a man that is intending to make a sacrifice of another human to God, it's not good. But it's important in looking at this to be very clear that God has always abhorred the concept of human sacrifice. He disallows it. He says that anybody that practices that should be put to death. And even showing through his providing a sacrifice for and, pulling Isaac out of that situation, that is not what he desires. That God has no patience for someone who is willing to make a human sacrifice. So regardless of how this plays out in this circumstance, God did not have any desire, or he was not willing for Jephthah to do what he may or may not have done. So we're going to keep reading so that I can continue getting into that. Verse 34 says that Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither sons nor daughters. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble for me, for I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." And she said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites." So she said to her father, "Let this one thing be done for me. Leave me alone for 2 months, that I may go up and down in the mountains and go weep for my virginity, I and my companions." So he said, "Go." Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity in the mountains. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man. And it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite for 4 days in the year. So that's pretty heavy. But I have good news. There is a way out. I personally look to the other places in the Old Testament where there was a person or a child sacrificed either to God falsely or to another god. And it is every time explicit. There is a king of Israel, of Israel, who sacrifices his son on the city wall. It's very explicit that he kills his son and burns him, offers him as a burnt sacrifice. This is not explicit in what happens to this girl. In fact, all that it says is that he did with her according to his vow that he had made. She never knew a man. So that is the only explanation of what happens here. Now, again, there are some who read this that believe without a doubt that she was sacrificed to God, that she was killed. But Jephthah does have knowledge of the law. And the good news is that there are many people in the land of Israel and the surrounding lands who are devoted on a personal level to God. To be devoted means that you are, forbidden, and that most of the time you are destroyed. So that would be the firstborn of every family. They were devoted to God. But the good news is that God gave the ability for parents to redeem their child that had been, by their birth, devoted to God. And they would be just redeemed with a price. If you want to read about that, it's in Leviticus chapter 27. But there's also the ability for somebody to devote or vow a slave to the tabernacle, or even in certain circumstances, people who were taken as prisoners in war could be devoted to God, but could also be bought back with a price. So that is one option, is that in this circumstance, Jephthah would have had the option to fulfill his vow to God still and not sacrifice his daughter, but to simply redeem her with the price of money. So that's good news. The other option is that much like Hannah and her son Samuel, she could have been devoted to the service and the worship of God in the tabernacle for the rest of her life. That's what happened with Hannah, that she prayed to the Lord for a son, and Eli, basically, asked the Lord to grant her request, and she had a son, and she vowed him to the Lord for the rest of his life. And he grew up in the tabernacle, in the service and worship of God. And in that circumstance, this girl could have also been, redeemed in that same circumstance by her life being given to the worship of God, not as a sacrifice by any means, but just as a servant in the tabernacle. So I think it's interesting that this is actually kind of left open to our own interpretation. There is nothing in the Bible that insists that Jephthah put his daughter to death or that he sacrificed her. And I choose to just kind of go on the bright side and believe that that the worst thing that happened to her is that she never got married. That would be sad, but it's much better than her being sacrificed. So that's just my personal conviction. But it really truly is left open to interpretation. So hopefully y'all will join me on the happier side there. But one way or the other, that is the interesting thing about the Word of God is that it's I like to say sometimes that it's like a diamond that has many facets, that depending on where you're sitting, you're going to see something different than somebody else is seeing. That doesn't mean in the vernacular of today that everyone has their own truth. That's not the point. That's not what I'm saying. But there are many circumstances in the Bible where the total end of a story is somewhat left open to interpretation. So anyway, that's the looking on the bright side in this situation. And another interesting thing is that the word in verse 40 that says the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, for 4 days in the year. This word lament can also be a word that means to visit with or to talk with. And so the scholars that I've read that believe that she was a servant in the temple would say that these young women have a kind of a festival at the tabernacle, more or less, that they go to talk with and to visit this young woman who becomes a minister at the temple for 4 days out of the year. So it's not for sure one way or the other. There definitely is tradition of the lamenting of the daughter of Jephthah that is brought down through rabbinical and Jewish historical writings. But either way, I'm just going to leave that behind and move on to the conclusion of Jephthah's story. So chapter 12, verse 1 says that the men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Japhath, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and didn't call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." So I'm going to bring up another trendy term. The Ephraimites were very susceptible to FOMO, which is the fear of missing out, okay? If we go just a few chapters back to chapter 8, we see again that the men of Ephraim said to us, "What is this that you have done to us not to call us with you when you went to fight against Midian?" Then they accused him fiercely. So they didn't quite threaten to burn his house down around him, but they have a tendency to accidentally miss out on the battle and then be upset with whoever had victory on behalf of the Lord. So they're mad again at Jephthah. Gideon had an interesting strategy where, the Ephraimites went and they captured the two princes of the people that he was fighting against. And he said, "Hey guys, I only got to kill like 132,000 people. You guys got these two guys." So he says to them that the gleanings of Ephraim were greater than the vintage of Gideon. In other words, kind of patting them on the back and saying, "Hey, you guys got the princes." But so Jephthah in verse 2, back in chapter 12, said to the Ephraimites, "I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand." So he's pointing out, as we saw, that he traveled through their land when he was on his way to battle, and they didn't come out to fight with him. So he's saying, "Hey, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but when I was in the fight of my life, you guys left me hanging. I took my life into my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. So this is a sad circumstance that the Israelites are having after victory that God has given them, they are immediately devolving into a relatively good-sized civil war between the Gileadites and the Ephraimites. Says that Jephthah gathered the men, and all the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, this is really confusing, but the Ephraimites said to the Gileadites, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh." And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. So basically they went anywhere that you could walk or ride across the river, which was a natural boundary, and they took those positions. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim, so basically they would be the guys who were stuck on the wrong side of the river after this battle, these fugitives would come and they would say, "Let me over." The men of Gilead would say to them, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he said no, they said to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And when he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right, they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. So this got really, really ugly. This devolved from a great victory that was granted by the Lord over their enemies to a great infighting that has nothing to do with service to the Lord or freedom from the bondage that they were in to their enemies. It kind of just goes to show that just because one physical bondage is lifted doesn't mean that the spiritual bondage that people apart from the Lord live under, it doesn't mean that spiritual bondage has been lifted. These guys are raising their swords against one another just because of a argument. There wasn't even any physical damage that was done to anyone. The Ephraimites obviously believed that the spoils of the battle and the glory were stolen from them, but kind of like the Hatfields and McCoys feud that started over a stolen pig that led to the death of dozens of people. This civil war inside of Israel that leads to the death of 42,000 people more or less just starts with arguments and insults that are cast back and forth between these people. So we have kind of a little bit of something that reminds me of a Monty Python scene going on here. I can see Ben was thinking the same thing over there. But, these guys are standing at the fords of this river. They are the arbiters of life and death. And the test that they decide to use is a pronunciation. I could see Monty Python changing it maybe into a spelling bee or something like that. But they, evidently there are some cultures that are divided by not very much space, but their language is so divided that, that one culture cannot correctly pronounce something that is being put before them. I've known some people like that. Maybe they all had one tooth missing or something. I don't really know, but they wanted them to be able to say shibboleth, but evidently in this region, the dialect, the people could not very well make an SH sound, evidently, and it comes out as a sib rather than a shib. So that led to the death of 42,000 of the Ephraimites, which, I don't think I even need to say this, but obviously this is a travesty that the Lord was not happy about. So verse 7 says that Jephthah judged Israel for 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in the city of Gilead. So after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters, and he gave in marriage outside of his clan. 30 daughters he brought in from outside for his sons, and he judged Israel for 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel for 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried in Ajalon in the land of Zebulun. So that's not the same Ajalon where the Lord had the sun and the moon stand still for the battle. It's a different city. That Ajalon was a valley. This one is a city. And after him, Abdon the son of Hillel the Piathurite judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel for 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Piathurite, that's a hard word to say, died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. So again, these guys are kind of like Tola and Jair, 3 more judges that have very little detail about their ministry. Evidently, none of them had any major battles to fight against the people of the enemies of the Lord. It kind of showcases the first guy was seemingly maybe a bit of a schemer who was trying to build power or a coalition by marrying his daughters to other powerful people and marrying his sons to or however that works, but making political marriages with his sons and daughters. The next guy, almost no details, just judges Israel for 10 years. And then this final guy, again, was similar in a picture to Jair, Jair had 30 sons who rode 30 donkeys, and this guy had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode 70 donkeys. So again, just a picture of pride and of wealth and of power that were displayed by the sons of this judge. It is interesting to note that we have 13 judges, and the judges are spread over almost all of the different tribes of Israel. There isn't any family or any tribe that has, any kind of claim to power, and it just is whoever God chooses to stand up and fight against his enemies, or in some circumstances, just men who see what needs to be done and stand up and defeat the enemies of the Lord and have the ability to rule over the people of Israel. So that was a short study tonight. Cool. 45 minutes. So did anybody have any questions? There's a lot of different directions that this could go, but did anybody have any questions about Jephthah or the battle or his daughter or any of the things that we looked at tonight?
I thought that Jephthah's daughter, her just immediate submission to her father.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Seemingly had faith in her father, but also,
There's kind of a picture of Jesus' submission.
yeah, and of Isaac as well. Yep.
James, with the study that you're doing, do you come across anybody's opinion or whatever about how do people know that this is the judge that's in power for this time? Or you know what I mean? It's like these guys just all of a sudden, this
Yeah.
How is their power made known to the people?
Oh, that is an interesting question. What I would say is for most of them that we have any detail about, there was a defining moment where they, like a judge becomes judge over Israel, typically when they have defeated an enemy. And that gives them the right, from God. Like that victory shows that God is putting them forward to be the leader of Israel. And then there's a point where they die. So it would be pretty much the period between the victory that they had over the enemy of God and their death. Because we don't see any judge that like steps down from power without dying. They die and once they die, the people go back and follow other gods again. And then the Lord raises up another judge.
Do they judge out of a?
They've all been in different places. Yeah. And there should be a spiritual leadership that is taking place during this time. Rabbinic scholars do have a definitive list of the lineage of the high priest all the way back to Aaron in the time of Moses, down to basically the destruction of the temple. There isn't anything in the Bible that necessarily matches that up, because there's really not a whole lot of high priests that are called out by name in the Bible. But they're supposedly, according to tradition, is a solid, unbroken line of high priests that go all the way back to Aaron. So that would mean that there is a high priest during this time, but he's never mentioned. We're going to be going on to Eli and Samuel. That's when the priests kind of come back into the picture again, really. And then, in the time of David, the entire priestly family basically is wiped out, and there's only one that's left, and that, continues on through him. But anyway, the priesthood is still at Shiloh at this point. And, there's some judges that seemingly traveled around and some that just kind of ruled from their house. Even when Saul becomes king, he just reigns from his farm for a while until he kind of grows a backbone and decides to be king over Israel. But yeah, I mean, when we started Judges, I went through a few reasons that I believe that Samuel was the writer of Judges. And, I think it is interesting, like, it seems like a short period of time that the judges reigned over Israel for like 300 or 400 years, and that anyone after that period should be able to remember what happened or know. But, our country's only been in existence for 250 years, and I don't know anything that's happened really in our history. So, there was somehow a record that was passed on, and then obviously through inspiration of the Holy Spirit, there was, the record that was kept. But yeah, I would bet it was possible, especially for some of these guys that didn't reign for very long, for a lot of people in Israel to not even know that there was a judge over them. I don't think there was like any kind of form of government that went and spread the news out anywhere or anything. And yeah, that was a really long answer sorry. Does anybody else have anything they want to? All right, we'll just close with a prayer, and then Lord, thank you for your word, for these interesting pictures and stories that are laid out before us. Just pray that you would just give each of us the wisdom to, whether in our hearts or with our mouths, not to vow foolishly, not to put ourselves in that position or you in that position. And just pray that as we look at this, that you would impress upon each of our hearts the desire that you have to bless us as your children, and that you would just continually draw each of us into a closer personal relationship with you, that we would grow in faith and in the knowledge of your Son. Amen.